Starting off this list, in our number 10 spot we have the disaster. We talk a lot about Chernobyl, but how often do we really discuss how this disaster actually happened in the first place? What actually went on that caused it? The Chernobyl nuclear disaster occurred on April 26, 1986 in Ukraine, which at the time was a part of the Soviet Union. During a routine safety test, a series of errors and design flaws led to an explosion in reactor 4 of the Chernobyl nuclear power plant. The explosion caused a massive fire that released radioactive material into the atmosphere, which was carried by wind across Ukraine, Belarus, and other parts of Europe. The disaster was caused by a combination of factors, including a flawed reactor design, a lack of safety, and human error. During the safety test, the reactor's power output dropped to dangerously low levels, leading to an attempt to restore power that resulted in a sudden surge. This caused the reactor to overheat, leading to a steam explosion that destroyed the reactor's upper structure. The accident caused immediate deaths due to the explosion, as well as long-term health effects from exposure to radiation. The Chernobyl disaster remains the worst nuclear accident in history in terms of the number of deaths and the environmental impact. It led to significant changes in nuclear safety regulations and increased awareness of the potential risks of nuclear power. In our number 9 spot today we have The Operator. This story is one that comes directly from Alexei Brius, who is a control room operator at the Chernobyl nuclear power plant, and this is his story of the day of the disaster, which starts as he was traveling on a bus to work on April 26, 1986, knowing nothing of the historic disaster that occurred just hours before. As he arrived, he thought, quote, "It looked like it would be a mass grave. I was sure that the whole night shift had died there." He continued on to say, quote, "At the moment of the explosion, I was in Pripyat in my flat. I was sleeping tightly. I didn't hear, I didn't see anything. In the morning, I was to go to work, and so I did. I knew nothing about the disaster. I just got on a bus and went to work. As I was coming close to the station, I saw from the bus that the block was destroyed. I always say that my hair stood on its end when I saw that. I didn't understand why me and other workers were brought there, but it turned out that there was still much work to be done. Me and my coworkers got off the bus and tried to enter the territory of the 4th block as we were supposed to. There was a guard wearing a rubber-coated army suit who had orders not to let anyone in. Finally, they agreed. The guarding sergeant gave us each a pill of potassium iodide. I took it immediately. It was a special medicine made to protect the thyroid gland from radiation. All my life, I remember him with gratitude. The upper part of the reactor and the separator barrel were open. The main circulating pump was seen from the outside. Down the reactor, I saw the reactor's emergency cooling system all ruined. Its pieces were mixed with slabs of concrete. I was stepping over lumps of black graphite. I didn't want to admit what I saw, just like many other people, that it was black graphite." Alexei goes on to explain that he and the other operators had to, quote, "save those injured by fire, debris, hot water, and steam and radiation. We were to find them, carry them out, and deliver them to the medical personnel and go look for others. We saved and brought everybody out except for one person. He is still somewhere there inside the reactor." In our number 8 spot today, a bit of a bit of a break in the really dark story, we have cows. Alright, cows can cheer anybody up. The area around Chernobyl was known for its agriculture before the disaster, so of course that means there were definitely a lot of cows that could be found. While many people who were forced to evacuate had to leave their animals behind, since farm animals are not only expensive but can also be used as a source of income, many people took their farm animals with them. Unfortunately, however, many of these animals had already been exposed to the radiation in some capacity, and while it didn't affect them right away, the newer generations saw much more of the effects. In 1989, many farmers began reporting birth defects in their animals, some being much more severe than others. As time went on, the cows became less mutated, but that doesn't mean the effects went away. As the cows continued to graze on feed that was contaminated, the effects became more internal. This has led to completely normal-looking cows near the exclusion zone to begin producing milk that is toxic and not fit for consumption. While some of the outside and more visible effects of the radiation has worn off, there are still many unseen effects that continue to be prevalent today. In our number 7 spot today we have the liquidators. In the immediate aftermath of the disaster, Soviet authorities sent in robots to help with the cleanup efforts in the most hazardous areas. This was an amazing idea until the robots quickly became damaged or destroyed by the high levels of radiation in the environment. The robots faced several challenges, including damage to their electronic components and problems with their movement systems. The high levels of radiation also made it difficult for the robots to function, as the radiation would interfere with the robots' sensors and their controls. Of course, with robots out of the picture, humans were the ones who continued with the cleanup efforts. Known as liquidators, these people were primarily Soviet military personnel, firefighters, and volunteers who were tasked with containing the radioactive material and preventing further contamination, and they faced extreme danger and were exposed to high levels of radiation. Many of these people were working without proper protective gear and in close proximity to the highly radioactive material. Despite these dangers, the liquidators worked tirelessly to contain the disaster and prevent further harm. Many of the liquidators suffered from acute radiation sickness, with symptoms including nausea, vomiting, and diarrhea. Long-term health effects including cancer and other illnesses have also been reported among the liquidators. The liquidators played a very vital role in preventing further harm from the Chernobyl disaster, and they are often referred to as heroes for their bravery and their sacrifice. Many have received recognition and awards for their efforts, but many continue to suffer from the long-term health effects of their exposure to the radiation. In our number 6 spot today, we have the abandoned amusement park. The Pripyat amusement park, located in the town of Pripyat in Ukraine, was set to open on May 1st, 1986, just days after the Chernobyl nuclear disaster. The park was intended to be a celebration of the town's prosperity and the Soviet Union's technological achievements, but it never opened its doors to the public due to the disaster. The park features a Ferris wheel, bumper cars, a carousel, and other rides which still stand today as an eerie reminder of the town's abandoned past. The Ferris wheel is particularly haunting, with rusted and decaying carts. The amusement park was never fully completed and its rides were never tested or operated, and today it serves as a chilling symbol of the devastating impact of the Chernobyl disaster on the town and its people. Despite the danger posed by the high levels of radiation in the area, the Pripyat amusement park has become a popular destination for tourists seeking to witness the haunting beauty of the abandoned rides and the town itself. In our number 5 spot today, we have The Pilot. This is another first-hand account from right after the disaster, and this one comes from Igor Pismensky, who was a helicopter navigator following the disaster. After the meltdown, helicopter crews were sent out to try and spread decontamination materials over the site. One of these crews was actually killed trying to do this work after they crashed at the site. Of the disaster, Igor said, quote, "They told us there had been an explosion at the plant, so they needed our help. The mission was, after the firemen, to drop down loads of stuff from helicopters to the destroyed reactor. First sand, then lead, dolomite, boron. We would load up about 15 kilometers distance from the reactor. They would put sandbags into parachutes, then we would take off and pass around in a conveyor fashion. There would be a circle of up to 40 helicopters in the air, which would fly over and right above the reactor every 2 to 3 minutes. No one opened the windows. The chopper was all shut, but it was not airtight. It was not protected against radiation. The view of the destroyed reactor down below, after the main fire had been put out, you could see separate glowing reddish fire beds in the first days. This was the view from the height of 200 meters. Of course, we knew this was dangerous, but what we did not have was adequate protective gear for the mission, but that's the responsibility of those who sent us there. Radiation is considered invisible. It cannot be seen, but you can feel it. That is, you can feel a certain metallic taste in your mouth and a sore throat. Radiation never passes without a trace, so the consequences are always there, and radiation usually hits precisely those parts of the body that are the most vulnerable. So for everyone who's gone through Chernobyl, there are consequences. I remember so well the first time we flew over Pripyat town. The whole town had been evacuated by then, but everything looked sort of surreal. Linen is hanging on laundry lines, on balconies, you see dropped bicycles, abandoned cars, no life around, all people gone, but their stuff is still there. When the catastrophe happened, there was the Soviet Union. We had 15 constituent republics playing their part in handling this mess. Today, no country in the world would be in a position to handle the problem of this magnitude if it happened again. In our number 4 spot today, we have the elephant's foot. The elephant's foot is a highly radioactive mass of corium that was formed during the Chernobyl nuclear disaster. It is named after its shape, which resembles that of an elephant's foot. The corium was formed when the reactor's core melted down, causing a mixture of melted nuclear fuel, concrete, and other materials to form into a highly radioactive mass. The elephant's foot is estimated to have had a temperature of around 2,700 degrees Celsius at the time of the accident and emitted lethal levels of radiation. The initial workers who tried to remove the elephant's foot from the reactor died within weeks due to the radiation exposure. Today, the elephant's foot remains extremely radioactive and is still inaccessible. It is estimated to be one of the most dangerous objects in the world, with exposure to it resulting in almost certain death within minutes. In our number 3 spot today, we have Kopachi. Kopachi was a village in Ukraine that was affected by the disaster. The village was situated close to the nuclear power plant, and its residents were exposed to high levels of radiation. To contain the spread of contamination, the Soviet government ordered the evacuation and burial of the village, including burying the contaminated soil under a layer of clean soil. Today, Kopachi remains abandoned and designated as a part of the exclusion zone around the Chernobyl plant. The village and surrounding area serve as a reminder of the devastating consequences of nuclear disasters and the importance of nuclear safety. In our number 2 spot today, we have the plant. It might come as a surprise, but the Chernobyl nuclear plant didn't just shut down entirely after the disaster. Despite the contamination and the risks associated, they continued to use the plant for years to come. Reactor 4, which exploded during the accident, was completely destroyed, and the other reactors were shut down over time. The Soviet government continued to use parts of the plant for several years to generate electricity and heat for the surrounding area, but eventually the plant was decommissioned. It wasn't until December of 2000 that the final reactor, Reactor 3, was shut down. Reactor 2 was shut down in 1991, and 1 was shut down in 1996. It is thought that the plant should be fully out of use by 2028. And finally, in our number 1 spot today, we have the containment. After the disaster took place, the damaged reactor, Reactor number 4, was sealed in a heavy concrete sarcophagus that was meant to keep the radiation concealed and contained. While this may seem like a foolproof plan, there are many debates about how effective this containment actually is and how effective it may or may not continue to be. These are, of course, super important questions, and considering the fact that it's something we've never really had to deal with before in any way, how are we really supposed to know until we try? The building of a new structure called the New Safe Confinement Structure started in 2006, and it was completed in 2017. The new structure is 843 feet wide, 531 feet long, and 356 feet tall, and is meant to keep the reactor and its previous sarcophagus contained for at least the next 100 years. Despite that relatively short amount of time, experts say that the exclusion zone and surrounding area will remain uninhabitable for the next 20,000 years.
Coming in first in our number 10 spot are abandoned dolls. So if you guys have ever seen one of my videos before, then you might already know I have a specific disdain for creepy dolls. And wouldn't you know it, the exclusion zone is said to be filled with broken and abandoned dolls at every turn. Apparently, the specific area is Pripyat, and those that have visited report seeing things like baby dolls sitting in abandoned hospitals, creepy dolls sitting on windowsills propped up, on skeletal bed frames sprawled out in piles of debris, and the most creepy of all, wearing a gas mask. Now, to be fair, there is a high possibility that while many of these toys are remnants from the actual disaster, there's definitely some tourism interference. But interference or not, many still believe the dolls are haunted. In fact, some visitors swear they've seen the dolls watch them as they walk along the grounds. So whether you are afraid of creepy evil dolls or not, broken dolls without limbs sitting in the middle of a nuclear ghost town is one of my worst nightmares. Coming in at number 9, a natural earthquake. Okay, so I'll start off by saying this might not fully be a creepy encounter, but it's definitely a strange little piece of the puzzle that I had never heard about until now. Apparently back in 1996, there had been a study to explore the possibility of an earthquake being a partial reason for the explosion of Reactor 4. However, experts quickly revealed that report had over 80 discrepancies, and so it was kind of thrown out as a theory. But the following year, in 1997, a separate group of scientists from the United Institute of the Physics of the Earth decided to revisit the study, and they came to an interesting conclusion. So as they reported, the night of April 25th, 1986, which was the night prior to the disaster, 3 nearby geological stations recorded a relatively weak seismic event. Now, normally this probably wouldn't be cause for concern, but according to the study, the earthquake, albeit small, is thought to have occurred a mere 16 seconds prior to the explosion, and could have potentially caused an issue with the proper insertion of the graphite rods designed to protect the reactor, as the facility lacked proper protection from seismic movement. I mean, if nothing else, it's definitely a strange little coincidence. Coming in at number 8, weaponized earthquake. Speaking of earthquakes, inside the Chernobyl exclusion zone, there is apparently also some evidence that tectonic weapons were being researched and developed in the Soviet Union at the time. Now, to be clear, it's not known if these weapons were actually ever deployed, but there are some theories out there that suggest that a weaponized earthquake might not be as far-fetched as it sounds. On May 30th, 1992, Pravda, which was the former official newspaper of the Soviet Union, reported that a geophysical or tectonic weapon was actually developed in the USSR despite the UN convention. Pravda, which was the former official newspaper of the Soviet Union, reported that a geophysical or tectonic weapon was actually developed in the USSR despite the UN convention. Now, of course, many higher-ups denied this, but some are sure that they saw it with their own eyes. I mean, it is an interesting theory and definitely makes you wonder what could have been going on behind closed doors. Coming in at number 7, faked photography. So believe it or not, Chernobyl is actually a pretty big tourist destination spot. And along with any tourist destination comes many photos. Now, there are some pretty famous photos that we associate with the abandoned area. However, according to photographer Darman Richter, a lot of these photos we see aren't actually authentic, but rather a facade created to make money off those who love dark tourism. Richter, who visited Pripyat for his own photography, said the city was desolate in many ways and still very dangerous. However, a lot of the chilling photos that have become famous online have been manufactured by photographers looking to create the perfect horror shot. Quote, "I observed countless instances of tourists moving these artifacts around or repositioning furniture for a better shot." He then says, quote, "I watched a photographer arrange stuffed bears and little dolls so that they sat in line along the edge of a bare metal framed bed." I mean, it's no secret that we live in a very curated world where everyone is posting their best moments, but something about trying to curate a disaster zone is definitely a very strange thing to think about. Coming in at number 6, immortality seekers. On a little island in Greece called Gavdos, there is an unsuspecting group of 7 Russian scientists who have created a commune and set out for the impossible, immortality. Apparently their founder, Andrei, had been exposed to high amounts of radiation after a voluntary trip to Chernobyl shortly after the blast. Andrei was, of course, advised to go to a clinic in Moscow for treatment. However, believing it was a lost cause, he apparently decided to settle in a small village and live out the rest of his life there. But this is where it gets a little strange. He lived. Now, this is sort of a conspiracy theory, I will admit. However, there are many that believe the scientists chose Gavdos in an attempt to seize control of the Earth and become immortal. The scientists created a tight-knit relationship with the church, and according to a documentary that was being created about the community, quote, "They feel they need to reconstruct the world and implement the birth of a new immortal human." Apparently, the scientists even began building a Greek temple where they aimed to revive Pythagorean philosophy and unearth forgotten Greek mysteries. All of which is said to be in the pursuit of immortality. Which, okay, I know it's all a little far-fetched, but I mean, if it turns out to be true, it would definitely be creepy. Coming in at number 5, Bible predictions. There are a ton of wild predictions out there, and I'll leave it up to you to decide whether or not you think that prophets and seers really do see into the future or not. That being said, there are some out there that believe the Chernobyl disaster was actually predicted in the Bible. According to the book of Revelations, quote, "And the third angel sounded the trumpet, and a great star fell from heaven, burning as it were a torch, and it fell on the third part of the rivers and upon the fountains of waters. And the name of the star is called Wormwood. And the third part of the waters became wormwood, and many men died of the waters because they were made bitter." Now, at first you're probably wondering, what on earth could that have to do with Chernobyl? Well, apparently in Russian, Chernobyl is said to mean wormwood. Now, could this be a coincidence? Sure, but it is definitely a bit strange. On top of that, the fires from reactor 4 have been likened to a torch, and it's believed the third trumpet referred to the accident itself, while the bitter water had to do with radiation. So what do you think? Was disaster predicted in the Bible? Coming in at number 4, mutated farm animals. At first it might sound like something from a science fiction novel, but according to ThoughtCo, just after the disaster, and again in 1989 to 1990, there was a huge spike in malformed farm animals. Many believe this phenomenon coincides with a failure of the sarcophagus, which was a concrete tomb that crews built around the failed reactor in the hope that it would stop leaking radiation or producing deformed farm animals, which, as we know now, didn't quite work out as hoped. Among the mutations seen in the local cattle, pigs, goats, and horses born in the area after the disaster, some suffered from intensely messed up faces, extra limbs, dwarfism, or unnatural colors. In fact, one tiny little piglet became a well-known victim of the radiation. The poor little thing suffered from a mutation called dipgus, which is when they have duplicated lower limbs, and it is definitely not a great sight, I will say that much. I mean, I love little piglets, but this one is definitely giving off more of a creepy horror movie vibe. That being said, you don't need to take my word for it. If you like, you can actually see it for yourself, as it is apparently on display at the Ukrainian National Chernobyl Museum. Coming in at number 3, graffiti. While you might think that most people would try to stay as far away as possible from nuclear disaster zones, there are a ton of people that sneak into the exclusion zone all the time. In particular, a group of graffiti artists who left behind some eerie art all over Pripyat, painted to appear as permanent shadows, assumingly like the actual ones left on the buildings in Hiroshima after their respective nuclear attack. Creepy black silhouettes adorn the abandoned city, creeping out everyone who sees them. In one room, a little girl with bows in her pigtails reaches for a light switch, while outside, a boy pulls a toy truck toward the corner of a building. On other walls, the figures appear to dance, and in a separate section, 3 young people are jumping, or as some speculate, floating, holding onto each other in terror. Those that have seen them in person say they are incredibly eerie and haunting, and some have even ventured to say that the spirits of the lost souls could live inside the walls, haunting the tourists who walk past. Coming in at number 2, aliens. There are definitely tons of theories surrounding alien involvement in the Chernobyl disaster, and while most theories are actually on the more positive side, with witnesses claiming they saw aliens stopping the disaster from getting worse, one witness, Michel, had a slightly different experience. Quote, "I and other people from my team went to the site of the blast at night. We saw a ball of fire and it was slowly flying in the sky. I think the ball was 6 or 8 meters in diameter. Then we saw 2 rays of crimson light stretching towards the 4th unit. The object was some 300 meters from the reactor. The event lasted for about 3 minutes. The lights of the object went out and it flew away in the northwestern direction." Now, the question here is, was the alien a part of the other group that people say were here to save the planet? Or were they some kind of rival that was interfering and making matters worse? I mean, honestly, I haven't one sweet clue, but any alleged UFO site is spooky in my books. And last up today in our number 1 spot, the ghosts. Considering that Chernobyl was the location of many deaths, it's not a huge shock that many claim to have witnessed ghosts roaming around the abandoned grounds. But one story in particular really sent shivers down my spine. Andrei Karsakov, a nuclear physicist, was visiting the area back in 1997 and says one morning he arrived at 7:30 and headed over to the number 4 reactor sarcophagus to measure radiation, where the infamous explosion had occurred. Obviously, he was not allowed inside due to the radiation, but as he was taking readings of the radiation from outside, he says he began hearing someone screaming for help from the inside. Quote, "I ran upstairs to tell someone, but they said that when I entered the reactor control room, I was the first person to open that door in 3 years. And the only way to get inside the old reactor is through the doors I came in through. If someone had gone inside inside the reactor when I was not looking, they would have tripped an alarm that goes off when the reactor door is opened mechanically. He went on to explain that the reactor door also requires a password and a handprint, yet he swore he heard someone screaming for help. Then later that evening, as they were eating, he noticed a floodlight turn on, which should have been impossible since there was no way anyone could be inside. Apparently his colleague tried to ease his suspicions by saying it could have been a power surge, but just as his colleague said that, the light snapped off, as if someone was inside listening to their conversation the whole time.
Starting off this list in our number 10 spot, we have the reactor visit. This is a story that was told by a nuclear physicist from New York, Andrei Karsukov, and he told this story after he visited Chernobyl in 1997. During this visit, he went to the power station around 7:30 a.m. and he went into what was left of reactor number 4. This is where the explosion occurred. He began to take some radiation level readings, but suddenly he began to hear someone scream. He said, quote, "I ran upstairs to tell someone, but they said that when I entered the reactor control room, I was the first person to open that door in 3 years, and the only way to get inside the old reactor is through the doors I came in through. If someone had gone inside the reactor when I was not looking, they would have tripped an alarm that goes off when the reactor door is opened mechanically. The reactor door requires a password and a handprint, yet someone or something was inside." Later that evening, as we were eating dinner outside the building by the river next to the plant, a floodlight turned on in the room of the installation. There was no way anyone could be inside. As we ate, we figured there was a power surge or something. Then, just as my colleague said that, the light turned off. Maybe the reactor itself is now haunted by the souls who lost their lives as a result of the meltdown. In our number 9 spot today, we have the Chernobyl ghosts. While you can visit certain parts of Chernobyl today that have been deemed safe, taking a trip may not be for everyone, or perhaps it's too far, or whatever 100 reasons there are for not visiting the site. But with the technology we have now, there's another way you can visit the site, and that is through trusty old Google Maps. Many internet people have walked through the streets of the exclusion zone, searching around, seeing what photos Google Maps holds. But with those virtual tours comes something that is absolutely terrifying people, and that is the apparent sightings of what is referred to as the ghosts of Chernobyl. People have reported seeing shadowy figures, sometimes even faces in the abandoned buildings left in the exclusion zone, and I have to admit, some of the screenshots I've seen are pretty terrifying. Do you believe these are real ghosts caught on camera, or is it just a legend like many of the other things on today's list? In our number 8 spot today, we have the Blackbird. People in the district of the Ukraine that houses Chernobyl have told stories of sightings of the Blackbird for years, and it is perhaps the most well-known legend that comes from the area. The Blackbird is a human creature with wings and piercing red eyes, and it was apparently seen by workers at the Chernobyl plant on the fateful day of the nuclear disaster. After this, it was reported that anyone who had seen the bird would later report suffering from terrible nightmares and begin receiving threatening phone calls. Many of the people where the legend originates from, unfortunately, were at the center of the disaster and have since passed away from the radiation poisoning, so no one is sure if the Blackbird really is out there or not. The Blackbird is said to be a symbol of something terrible being afoot, so seeing it is definitely not a great thing to happen to a person. I think it's probably just another one to add to the list of reasons why maybe a Chernobyl visit isn't the best idea. I don't know, okay? It's for your health. In our number 7 spot today, we have the government cover-up. Of course, a disaster like this is going to get some government conspiracies swirling around it, and this little ditty suggests that the Chernobyl disaster was actually conducted by the Soviet government due to the failure of a new, at the time, huge missile defense radio structure called Duga-3. This structure, that actually exists in real life, is suspected of having been wildly over budget, and it was the source of many complaints after it was built. The systems were extremely powerful and broadcast in shortwave radio bands. They would appear without warning and sounded like a sharp, repetitive tapping noise, and it would disrupt things like legitimate broadcasts, amateur radio, commercial aviation communications, and utility transmissions, which all led to there being international complaints, and at the time, people didn't know what it was. This strange noise actually would go on to gain the tower the nickname Woodpecker for a an idea of what the sound sounded like. Because of the fact that people didn't know where this sound was coming from, it led them to think that this signal was actually being used for things such as Soviet mind control or weather control experiments. So the story suggests that in order to eliminate it, the nearby Chernobyl facility was allowed to go into meltdown. It seems like they probably could have done something much less lethal and much less damaging, so I'm not exactly sure how true this one could possibly be, but there are definitely people out there who believe it. In our number 6 spot today, we have the spiders. The spiders that are residing within the exclusion zone are, of course, radioactive, but it's not only the spiders that are now dangerous to touch, it's also their webs. Spiders in Chernobyl are literally making radioactive webs, which is the stuff straight out of a comic book. These radioactive webs are also being woven in much different ways than they once were, which would suggest, of course, some sort of genetic mutation is at play. Spiders were already a creature I'd like to stay far, far away from. I feel just like tingly talking about them, but radioactive spiders adds a whole new level. Not only are the spiders now dangerous for non-radioactive animals to touch, but walking through their web is equally as dangerous to those who aren't thriving in the radiation. So not only do you have to watch out for regular old radioactive material, but now also get the never-ending construction of radioactive webs. That's amazing. It's so great. In our number 5 spot today, we have the alien invasion. Okay, it seems absolutely insane, but there is an alien conspiracy that actually revolves around Chernobyl, and there are people who believe it's true. There is part of this theory that I like, and that is because it basically suggests that aliens saved humanity. Yeah, in this story, they didn't cause disaster or try to steal our planet, and instead, they saved us from a complete and total meltdown. What happened, and how this all started, is that around the same time of the Chernobyl disaster, people reported spotting a number of UFOs. One witness even said that they saw a UFO for 6 hours. So basically, because of this uptick in sightings, people believe that the aliens came to help sort of diffuse some of the radiation levels that were seen after the disaster. This would have helped to prevent an even larger blast with an even higher amount of death and illness. This is sort of a conspiracy brought up to explain how, while this meltdown was of course catastrophic, it didn't leave like apocalyptic level damage, which believers of this theory said there should have been. So what do we think? Did aliens come to save the planet? In our number 4 spot today, we have The Musician. This is a story that comes from a Redditor named Jake, but this actually isn't Jake's story. This is the story of a man named Yuri who Jake met at a bar in Finland. Yuri is actually a Chernobyl survivor, and he had quite the harrowing tale to share with Jake. Yuri is a musician, and at the time of the disaster, he was in a state-sponsored musical dance troupe. Basically, as soon as the disaster happened, this group was called upon by the government to come in and calm the people living in the area. Yuri said, quote, "Mere hours after the meltdown commenced, our bus entered the exclusion zone at checkpoint Dityatki. We were told not anything, and the soldiers made it forbidden for speaking with the village people. Imagine not knowing a disaster taking place, yet seeing the strange workings of the radioactivity all around. Everyone was sick and dying, yet quarantined and not allowed to leave the zone." This is all chilling, but this is where the story takes a terrifying turn. He begins to describe their final performance, which was in Pripyat. The ballerina danced, knowing something horrible had happened, and she danced like never before, and she even let her hair down from her bun to just let it flow. Suddenly though, Yuri noticed that these locks of hair weren't just falling out of her bun, they were falling down to the ground. Basically, Yuri ends off his story by explaining his escape, which was through back roads and avoiding military checkpoints, and he ends off by saying that he is the only one of his group to survive. In our number 3 spot today, we have barn swallows. Any animal who lives in the exclusion zone has to have been affected by the disaster, and that includes those who spend most of their time in the sky. I'm obviously talking about birds. The barn swallows in Chernobyl are one animal who have seen a change in their physical appearance that has lasted all of the years since the nuclear meltdown. It is unclear why these birds have been affected greater than their land animal counterparts, or if these changes will ever reverse to their previous state, but here's what they are currently dealing with. The swallows appeared to have severely deformed beaks, disproportionate feathers, some had partial albinism, and they were seen to have had much smaller brains. Of course, some of these issues are much worse than others, and I'm sure these changes have significantly affected their ways of life, but of course, they continue to adapt as time goes on. It is sad that this human-made disaster has affected them in such a negative way, but the fact that they are still around really shows their adaptability and their resilience. In our number 2 spot today, we have the Chernobyl zombies. This little legend that comes from within the exclusion zone claims that after the Chernobyl disaster, we of course know that unfortunately people lost their lives, but what happened if those who did then became the undead? We're obviously talking about zombies here. There are plenty of legends that suggest the exclusion zone isn't dangerous and off limits because of the toxic radiation, but actually because there are brain-eating zombies wandering the area. I mean, I personally have never received a lethal dose of radiation, so I cannot confirm nor deny that this would turn one into a zombie, but I'm gonna go ahead and call this one most likely fake. I mean, at least I am really hoping it is. We're dealing with enough as a society. We don't need zombies on the list. This little legend can most likely be attributed to a video game that takes place in the exclusion zone, but it certainly is not based on any real life facts, at least that we know of. Finally, in our number 1 spot today, we have the Stalkers. Speaking of that video game, which is called Stalker, it might have inspired the tales of the zombies, but it also apparently has inspired some to try and sneak into the exclusion zone themselves. This popular game set in the zone has made some people try and sneak into it themselves in real life in order to live out the game. You know, like a LARPing scenario, but the only enemy this time is radiation. Basically, there are these people who are now being referred to as stalkers, and they are said to be sort of romanticizing the exclusion zone. They like to sneak in, explore the ruins, sleep in the abandoned buildings, and sometimes even bring in a device to show them how much radiation they're being exposed to, which is pretty frightening. Despite these dangerous explorers sharing their nickname with the video game, however, the name actually comes from characters in the novel Roadside Picnic, which was turned into a classic Soviet film entitled Stalker, directed by Andrei Tarkovsky. The term stalker is meant to refer to thieves who sneak into places that are harboring lethal secrets. Some even tried to tempt fate even more by doing things like eating fruit that they found growing in the zone. Because of the fact that this place is meant to be off limits, many of those sneaking in here who consider themselves stalkers wear things like paramilitary gear, they wear gas masks, balaclavas, and other things to cover their face. All in all, it's very dangerous and also very unsettling.
Number 10. The Scanner. This story comes from a user when she was in freshman year of college. She had never been with a boy and had never even kissed one, and she decided she was tired of being so sheltered, so she started going on Tinder. She met a boy for dinner and a movie after they had been chatting for a while, and everything seemed pretty normal. He was then supposed to drive her home, and it was late at night when she realized she had no idea where they were. The car was just on a gravelly road surrounded by farmland. The man said that he was just taking the back roads. Not ominous at all. He says that they were not far away and asked if he could turn on his police scanner. Her just thinking, okay, maybe this guy is a little weird. He then pulled over the car to the side of the road and turned off the headlight. Rightfully, she panicked and pretended to receive a phone call for her mom, being sure to say on the call that she was on a date and would be home soon, and he then took her home. To this day, she is glad she got out of the situation as she fears what might have happened on that road. Number 9. The Dog. This one comes from a user who started talking to a guy on Tinder who happened to live just down the street from her. The guy would apparently constantly talk about his dog and how he wanted her to come over to his place so she could meet the dog. Eventually, she did agree to come over, and he told her to park her car diagonally next to a large boat that he had in the driveway, leaving only a few inches of room on either side. They eventually get in after the man answered the door in his boxers, and she saw that there was almost no furniture inside the home. He then started asking her strange questions like if anyone was expecting to see her that night, what's her blood type, and who does she live with. She then realizes that this whole time she hasn't seen a dog, or any evidence that one even lives there. When she asked about it, he simply smiled and continued on with his questions. She eventually managed to leave after he begged her to stay, and then later asked her to join him on a ride into the mountains. Thinking back, she believes that he made made her park her car so tightly so she wouldn't be able to quickly escape. Number 8. The friend. This story comes from a self-called introvert who decided it was time for herself to open up and step into the dating world. She matched with a guy and they hit it off pretty well, talking pretty often. She enjoyed talking but realized that every time they spoke she got a lot of anxiety and had kind of a bad gut feeling about it, but she brushed it off as maybe just her introverted tendencies. Her friends encouraged her and she continued to speak with him after a brief period of ignoring his messages. She agreed to go out to dinner with him, but when she showed pictures to her friends, they pointed out that he looked pretty similar to a shitty ex of hers, and so she panicked and called off the date, unable to continue with it. She then started receiving tons of calls from him, begging her to speak to him again, and when she finally picked up, the person calling revealed that they weren't even her Tinder match, but instead his friend. He said that the man had said he could have her, and that he knew what school she went to, and he would just hang around campus and wait. She blocked him, and fortunately, she never heard from them again. Number 7. The train. One of the most important parts of going anywhere is making sure you have a way to get home, and the guy in this story was presumptuous about where he was going to be spending the night. This girl invited her Tinder date to a concert where he proceeded to get incredibly drunk and unruly. She got tired of it and decided that she was gonna ditch and go to a bar with some of her friends. So she asked him when his last train home was, and he responded by saying it was already gone. She was shocked and asked him how he was planning to get home, and he responded with, "I'm coming home with you." Pretty assuming, threatening, and creepy. He followed them to the bar, but he was soon kicked out for being so drunk that he couldn't even stand up. The next morning, she woke up to a string of pathetic phone calls from him, and finding out that he had ended up in the emergency room after being so drunk he fell through a window. Number 6. The bag. Alright, this one is probably the most intense and unsettling on this list. The girl had finally made it to the 3rd date with her Tinder match, and feeling pretty comfortable, agreed to hang out with him in his home. He poured her a glass of wine, and for the most part things seemed to be going well, until she started feeling the effects of something else having been mixed in her wine. Fortunately, she recognized the feeling and made it to the bathroom, where she notified the police. She passed out but was woken up by the police, who put a bag over her head to lead her out of the home. A few days later, she was requested to come down to the police station and give her statement of what she was able to remember about that night, and she remembered the police having put a bag over her head, curious about why they would have done that. They responded that it was so she couldn't see what the man had set up for her throughout the house. Number 5. The theorist. Now, to lighten the situation, let's look at one post that is a little less terrifying. This one comes from a guy who was staying in a hotel in a different city, deciding to invite a girl over from Tinder to make the night a little more interesting. When she got there, they shared small talk and ended up talking about astrology. Being nice, he encouraged her to continue, and continue she did. Eventually, she started talking about how she fully believes in various different conspiracy theories like the Illuminati, fluorinated water, Washington being arranged into a pentagram, and other various things. He said that unfortunately this made him lose any interest in her, and eventually it got so late that she just decided to leave. Not scary, but more just amusing and bizarre, and honestly thinking back on it, that may have been me. Number 4. The stalker. This one comes from a girl who started messaging with a guy on Tinder that wasn't her usual type, but still attractive enough. She notes how she made the dumb mistake of mentioning where she worked in their conversation. The same night she mentioned that, she was at work and saw a guy walk past who looked eerily like her Tinder match. A couple days later, she was at work again and was speaking to the man over the phone when she mentioned she would have to talk to him later because her phone battery was almost dead and she didn't have a charger. Just 10 minutes later, the same man she had seen the other day, her Tinder match, walked in with a phone charger for her to use, even though he had said he lived on the very other side of the city. She decided to cut ties there and saw that earlier in the day he had posted a selfie on Instagram with the caption, "I am now a taken man." She said that for weeks afterwards, she would still see him walking outside of her work. Number 3. The abductee. Now let's look at another story that definitely could have maybe been me if I were a man. This girl met a man on Tinder that she had a great time talking online with, and they seemed to get along really well. So they met up, but she then realized that she just wasn't really fully attracted to him, but they decided to keep talking. As time went on, he proceeded to talk about how he had been abducted by aliens throughout his life and even as far back as into his childhood. He had apparently been taken by the aliens multiple times because they had placed a tracking device in his arm, even showing her a scar that he had where he believed it had been placed. She decided that was finally where she had to call it off, and he admitted he felt stupid for bringing it up on the first date. I don't know, is alien abduction something you would want to get out there quickly, or is that like a third date, fourth date kind of thing? Number 2, the cats. This one comes from a guy who decided to meet with his Tinder date for the first time at a barbecue she was having with some of her coworkers. They got along pretty well, and by the end of the night she invited him to come over to her place and he agreed. On the way to her house she mentions that she takes in stray cats. He says that he's allergic, but it shouldn't be an issue as long as he doesn't touch them, thinking that she has like maybe 3 or 4. She responds by saying that she has 15. When they opened the door he saw a dozen set of eyes staring back at him from the darkness. The house was apparently in a complete state of disarray due to the cats, and the girl apparently not putting very much effort into cleaning. He didn't back out immediately, but after watching about half of a movie he decided he needed to get out of there. When he woke up a few hours later, he discovered his eyes had been swollen almost completely shut because of the cats. Number 1, the mom. This one is incredibly short and not overly unsettling, but is arguably the best one on this list and one of the biggest red flags ever. This girl agreed to meet her Tinder date for dinner, and when she got there, he was already there, with his mother. He said that she had to be there because he and his mom were a package deal. Would you move forward with that date, or would you just walk out right there?
At number 10 we have Jay Frazina in the Austrian caves. If the show Planet Earth has taught me anything, it's that caves are dark and beautiful ecosystems that are teeming with life. And in this video there's a shot of some of that life that seems to be something I've never seen before. In this video Jay Frazina is on a little hiking trip in Austria. She's with a whole group, so it seems like she should be pretty safe. Unless you're the one person on the tour who they forget and then you get stuck in the cave and then you're like on the side of a mountain for the rest of your life getting attacked by bears. That could happen. Well, this mountain tour leads to a cave and then they start to check it out. Caves are really one of the marvels of the world. Just then she's surprised by some sort of creature.
Someone climbing up the wall. It's an iceman. It's a ghost. Jesus, what is that? Do you see that? Oh my God.
What the hell is that thing? It looks like some sort of lizard man working its way up the wall with ease. It's really far away, so it's super hard to tell what this thing is or how big it is, but it's some sort of beast man living in the cave, climbing up the walls. That's what it looks like. I'm gonna say just let this thing be and don't bother checking it out. At number 9 we have the Riesa Tunnels creature. So during World War II, the Germans wanted to build some sort of tunnels in the Owl Mountains, all the way over in Poland. Why did they want to do this? Well, we have no idea. Hitler was into all sorts of weird stuff. He had troops out there looking for magical artifacts. I guess if he won the war, he wanted to be a part-time warlock. Well, some people not so long ago wanted to go check out these tunnels to see what was going on in them, and they were in for a bit of a shock. This group of dudes was walking through when they saw this. Here's another man just running around in caves, I guess. Is there a whole world of things underneath us that we don't know about? That thing did look kinda like a humanoid. It looks like it was running around on 2 legs, but obviously it was moving very fast because by the time they turned the corner to look at it, it was gone. At number 8 we have Satan's Cave. Well, if you're a kid growing up in Minneapolis, I can imagine you get bored really quick, so finding a cave to walk around in probably sounds better than smoking weed in the park with all your friends and complaining about your mom. Now this group of kids went into some caves underneath Minneapolis in search of what's called Satan's Cave. They end up walking through what kind of looks like a sewer with a bunch of graffiti on the walls and some strange demonic faces that have been carved all over the place. Now this is super strange, but they want to get to Satan's Cave, so they continue past the demonic Art Deco. Eventually they get to a tunnel that heads straight down so far you can't see the bottom of it. This could be what they were looking for, but naturally they were like, screw this, and decide to turn back and exit the cave. Probably a smart move. At number 7 we have Train Tunnel Surprise. So what's a tunnel and what's a cave? It's kind of like a tomato situation. They're both holes in the ground where everything is dark and spooky. So I'm probably gonna throw a few tunnels on this list, and I don't care what you guys say because who cares? It's a tunnel or a cave, it doesn't matter. Well, a bunch of teens thought it would be a good idea to try and walk through a train tunnel in the middle of the night. These tunnels are right next to Odell Lake in Oregon, and usually there's large transport trains moving through them. Well, guess what happened while they were crossing through? A train showed up. Yeah, who would have thought of that? A train coming along train tracks? Well, these kids had to jump off the tracks and press themselves against the walls while standing in some gross swamp water so the train didn't run them over. Luckily, nobody was hurt. Alright guys, at number 6 we have Lost. Okay, getting lost in a cave is one thing. You could probably last for at least a few days until people found you. But getting lost in a cave underwater while you're free diving, you have minutes before your air runs out. Well, Kodiak Moraski was doing some sport fishing while free diving. He was chasing down a little lobster and then got a little too far into a cave. This got him all turned around and he couldn't find his way out. He started to panic, but luckily he was able to find which way he came in. I guess the scary encounter in this cave was almost drowning to death. At number 5 we have Nick in the Caves. Okay, this one has got a lot going on. This starts with a Russian YouTuber named Nick. He's got a channel where he explores creepy caves and places like that. On one episode, he decides to explore some old Russian caves with some friends. While exploring, he gets into a section that is so tight he has to take his backpack off and leave it behind. And then he gets separated from his friends. He explores a bit without his stuff and then comes to some strange sections. There's a part with a jug, it's set up to catch water, but it's like, who is that for? This is in a cave in the middle of nowhere. Eventually he's freaked out and he heads back the way he came. He gets back to his backpack and he sees that it's been opened and his stuff is scattered everywhere. Who or what did this? While he's collecting his things, you can see a pair of eyes in the reflection of the camera. He doesn't see this until he reviews the footage, but you can see these dark eyes peering at him through the darkness. It's very creepy. My hair is standing up just talking about it. At number 4 we have Big Ol' Spider. Alright, this one is simple. Michel Krosberg was in a cave in Laos and then he found a giant spider. He said it was as big as a pizza. That's super gross. This thing is so big it looks like it could eat a pug. Honestly, to be number 4 on the list, that's all you need. You don't need to be something supernatural or like some demon from another dimension. It just needs to be a super gross spider because I think they're disgusting and I don't want anything to do with them. That's how you get number 4 on this list. At number 3, we have the Cave of Screaming Terror. Okay, right off the bat, you call a place the Cave of Screaming Terror, and I'm not going to visit. I don't think anyone in their right mind would think this is a fun place to check out. While you're at it, why don't you go check out the House of the Soul Suckers, or the Forest of Getting Kicked in the Nuts? Well, this one dude went for a swim in the cave because most of the cave is submerged, so if you're gonna go inside, you have to swim. And he doesn't even bring a boat to go in. He's just straight up swimming in it. That's asking for some cave creature to pull you down and rip your insides out. The dude swimming was Don L. Buckley, and while he was going for his nice little float through the cave, he started to hear this. But whatever it is, Donnell didn't want to figure out where it was coming from, and he beelined it out of there. Good idea. At number 2, we have MJ in the Cave. The ghost of Michael Jackson was attacking people in a cave and it was all caught on camera. Nah, I'm just lying to you guys, because that's fun for me. We're not talking about the famous pop star Michael Jackson. We're talking about the YouTuber Mark Johnson, of course. He was exploring the Cave of the Winds in Colorado when several paranormal encounters happened. First, we have this weird noise that kinda sounds like a ghost farting or dropping a massive turd. Do you think you still have to crap in the afterlife? Do you believe in ghost poops? Please, let us know your thoughts in the comments. It's not long after this that we see another paranormal encounter. An orb! I don't know much about ghosts because I don't spend my time watching Ghost Hunters. I've got better things to do, like literally anything else. But those orbs are supposed to be ghosts walking around doing like ghost stuff, like slamming doors and watching you sleep. Okay, you guys, we're on to number 1 now. And the number 1 spot on our list goes to an account from a park-wearing dog. Oh, he's so cute. You guys have probably seen this dog all over the internet. His name is Tret, he's a pit bull, and he can climb trees and do all sorts of cool stunts. Well, one day his owner was taking this good old boy out for a walk when he came across an old old well. A well is basically a cave, it's just like sticking in a different direction. You guys know, wells are still in the theme of caves, especially if they're old and abandoned. Tret's owner hears something weird coming out of the well, so he decides to take a cool little video, and then we see this happen. What the hell is that? It definitely doesn't look like something that should be hanging out in a forest. It looks like something that came out of the gates of hell. But let me know what you guys think of this thing in the comments, and let me know if you thought this one was deserving of the #1 spot.
Starting us off with number 10 is 17 Hours. This sort of reminds me of the book called Touching the Void, where these two guys are climbing this glacier or mountain, and something goes wrong and one of them has to cut the rope and let the other one loose, otherwise they were both gonna die, and the one who gets cut off lands in this crevice and actually survives. Either way, this one was shared by Reddit user Beach Knoll, whose grandpa had just gone back from World War II and decided exploring was his new hobby. Him and his friends went into Mammoth Cave despite it being on privately owned property. Laws were a lot more lax back then, clearly. Either way, while in there with their flashlights, they had a group of people somewhere else in the cave because of all the echoing. They quickly cut the lights since the sounds didn't seem very friendly, and they waited. His grandpa and friends went deeper into the cave to lose them, and imagine this level of darkness where you can't even see your own hand in front of you. It's like a black hole with just no light coming in. They then spent 17 hours in there hiding, and the only thing getting them through it was one of their friends saying, "We didn't survive that to die in here," obviously referring to the war. And no, you didn't, my friend, so you're gonna survive that. Coming in at number 9 is a secret society. This one's from Reddit user Ludovico Specs and was about the basement that was under his college language lab. Turns out the place was turned into some sort of secret society in the 1800s, and the whole building used to belong to them at one point. It had hospital lights all over it, which were always just very creepy. There's an inch of water on the floor too, but the weirdest part was the main room. It had vaulted ceilings supported by pillars that had stone skulls mounted on top of them. On top of the skulls were metal spikes, which is just sus as well. Why would the secret society need just skulls on poles? It's weird. The front room also had this also with the backstage area that had a chair with a bunch of questions written on it, like were they a secret society or a cult? Now the user thought his discovery was pretty cool, so he came back the next night with some of his friends to show them. The night after that, he tried coming back again, but it had been mysteriously padlocked. No one wanted him snooping, evidently. And number 8, we have the closet. This one would have sent me running for the hills and was shared by You See The Thing Is on Reddit. The police had confiscated this house from a biker gang a few years back, and it had sat empty ever since. So the user, who works at an insurance company, had to go to the house and assess its damage. We already know insurance people always screw you over, so okay. Now while in there, he described the house as pretty normal, you know, white walls, red plywood flooring, the door locks weren't rusted yet, so it was all pretty good, pretty normal. But then they opened the linen closet to see deep scratch marks all over the inside and dents like someone was trying to escape from inside of there. The worst part was that right on the back wall was this red splatter that had been painted over but was still very visible. The user's thoughts went to the person finally escaping to then somehow getting shot in the head, which is beyond screwed up, but I mean the scratch marks, the dents, like it makes sense. Filling at number 7 slot is Choo Choo. Now this one was shared by Reddit user Hi Dingy Doo, who shared that he used to walk along this old abandoned railroad line just to observe some wildlife, which sounds really peaceful actually, and I'm sure it was until this encounter. Over the years, the metal tracks rusted and were taken out, and all the equipment was also taken away. The whole thing became overgrown with shrubs and weeds, and so to an outside perspective, you never really would have been able to tell it had been a train track ever. Either way, one night the user went walking there with a friend, and out of nowhere they hear a voice saying choo choo. Shitting themselves, they turned around to see this old smiling man crouched in the bushes just staring at them from the dark shadows, like, who the hell are you, bro? Like, I'm just trying to vibe and observe some wildlife, like, who the frick are you? Oh hell no! I would have literally just kicked the old man. I'm really not as violent as you guys think I am, but like, I will kick people if I have to. I'm not even worried about it. Now at number 6 are the cats. This one makes my blood boil and was shared by Redditor Jetstream Wolf 12. They shared that there's this one hotel in their hometown that's super run down and that everyone just kind of breaks into fun. So they and 2 friends decided to crawl into the basement from a side entrance. Initially all they saw was graffiti, but as they went upstairs they saw blood stains all over the floor. Was someone murdered there? For hand out in a second. Now they see a bunch of dead cats that have been dragged around this room and come to the realization it's their blood. That was all they had to see before running the frick out of there. Like, no. That would have been me before some serial killer in the back just like hits me like she was annoying. Coming in at number 5 is the ice plant. This one was shared by Redditor Digital is 303, who was very into urban exploration as a teenager. See, I was more into Gossip Girl and reading than I was exploring abandoned buildings, but to each their own. I never judge. Outwardly. Now either way, there was this old ice plant near the user's house that had burned down 35 to 30 years beforehand, which is very ironic. You're an ice plant and you burned it down. Bit of shocking behavior. Either way, the place was super overgrown, and as the user was exploring the mangled concrete and rebar, everything seemed just normal and old and burned. Disappointed, the user went home, but a few days later they hear that a corpse was pulled out of the plant by the police. The user had literally walked past a dead body and had no idea. Like, dude, open your eyes or your nose. How do you not smell a dead corpse? Apparently they smell like proper shit. Like, was your nose blocked that day, bro? What's going on? At number 4 is the cleanup. Abandoned mental hospitals are one place you will just absolutely never find me. Too much pain and suffering has been endured in these places, especially from the way they used to be treated. So this one comes from Reddit user Slothcopter, who said they explored this abandoned mental hospital that opened up sometime in the 1800s. They opened this freezer inside to find mold all over it and inside of it, and in the past they had used it to put dead bodies in there. So did those bodies mold? Did the mold come from something else? I don't know. Now in another hallway they found the word blood written in blood since they had it tested, and the word high written in spray paint, which clearly meant others had explored this place before this person did. Which is not surprising since urban explorers will literally do everything except like meth. Either way, the person decided to visit the place again a few days later, and when they did, the blood was mysteriously gone, but the high was still there. So who's coming in and out of this place and leaving messages in blood and then cleaning them up? Filling at number 3 slot is the Sprinter. This one comes from a now deleted Reddit user who went to explore an abandoned school in his town with a few of his friends. It was really hard to get into since the whole thing was boarded up, but they managed to climb up a pipe on the side of the school and get in through a window. They checked out the basement first that had been flooded, so it was very eerie just watching the stairs disappear underwater. They then checked out the gym, and as they were leaving it, they heard single footsteps coming from the other side of the gym door. Now that scared the shit out of them since this person or thing was blocking their roof exit, trajectory. The person sounded like they were just periodically walking around and then stopping, not even properly exploring. There was no light where they were coming from, which spooked the group even more. The group decided to hide out for a bit, and after seeing no one in the hallways, they decided to make a break for the roof exit door. As soon as they did, they heard someone sprinting after them, not even that far behind them. They ran the hell up those stairs and managed to get out without getting caught or killed by whoever was in there. Bro, why were you in there alone, you creep? Now at number 2 is quitting your job. This one was effed and came from Redditor Takausin, who said this happened around 13 years ago. As an electrician, him and his partner were sent out to this restoration project for a house that was built in the early 1900s. Now when they got there, they were told some info about the house, like how it had 2 owners since it was built, and how the last one was this old woman who passed away a decade prior, and there was no one left in her family that could take it. So it was auctioned off to this young couple who wanted to modernize the whole place, which is very understandable. So they got to work installing things and had to open the attic hatch to find out it was very cramped as hell up there, and so only the tiniest worker could go up and replace the intake cable. Now the user was the smallest, obviously, so he went up there and could smell this old people smell, so he just assumed it was like her death smell, but it kept getting stronger. When he got up there fully, the stench was awful, and when he turned his flashlight on, to the left of him, he saw 5 cat carcasses, some partially eaten by insects or whatever eat corpses, and the others were just bones and rotten skin. The dude had just had his lunch break, so he threw up on the spot and actually quit his job after this project was done. That's scarring. And finally, at number 1 is the Asylum. This one actually scared me a bit in my seat, and it's not even like I sit at my desk in a room alone. There's people around me, I was just still scared because I'm small. Shared by Reddit user Daddy's Little Screamer, when she was was 16, she and her friend decided to explore the abandoned asylum grounds near her house. Firstly, if I lived in a house near asylum grounds, I would have forced my parents to move. That's not happening from any angle. There was this one tower there that had been locked for what seemed like forever, but that day it wasn't, and at the top of the tower there was a light on, and they both heard a dog barking. Thinking a dog maybe accidentally got itself stuck in the tower, they looked up and were shocked. There's a silhouette in the window for sure, but it was a person's silhouette, not a dog's. The person was the one barking. Without even going into the tower, the girls ran away, and all they heard was this person call out "bye now" in a creepy sing-song voice.
Number 10. Richard Cabell. This man lived in Devon, England during the 1600s and was apparently a huge dirtbag. He would torment people in his town and even abuse his wife. One night, in a violent rage, he struck his wife and she tried to escape. He then hunted her down and killed her and her dog. We all know what happens next. People believe that he felt he had the freedom to treat everyone horribly because he made a deal with the devil for immortality. But he did eventually die on July 5th, 1677. After he died, there were reports of a ghostly figure walking around the gravesite. This freaked out the locals so much, so they put a giant slab of stone on top of his grave, as well as encased the tomb with metal bars. And it was said that at night you could see a ghostly figure that kind of looked like a beast with glowing red eyes. Some people thought that it was Satan looking for the soul that belonged to him. Number 9. The Carpenter. The devil's weaved into history in so many different places. This ancient tale comes from a village called Tyrol in Austria. The legend has it that the locals had a well-traveled bridge that they used to cross from their village to a village called Schruns. One day, the bridge was destroyed in a massive flood. The villagers were very distressed, so they got help from a local carpenter. They told him that if he could rebuild the bridge in 3 days, they would pay him a huge amount of money. He knew such a task would be impossible, so he asked the villagers if he could have a day to think about it in order to come up with a solution. That night, when he was trying to find a way to build the bridge in such a short period of time, he was visited by a man with a little green hat. I love how these stories just have some creepy dude that shows up to your house in the middle of the night, and you're like, I wonder what he wants. It couldn't be anything bad. Well, the little man told the carpenter that he would build the bridge for him, and he could keep all the money. The only thing he wanted in return was the soul from the first person to leave this house and cross the bridge. The carpenter knew this was the devil, so he had a plan. The next day, the bridge was built and the carpenter showed up. The devil saw him there and was jumping in excitement to get his prize. Then the carpenter pushed a goat onto the bridge and said, "Here's your soul." You got played, dude. Legend says the devil took the goat and people started roasting him as he was walking around with the goat. People were like, "Hey, you should have read the fine print. Oh, you two look like a great couple." I just love the idea of people roasting the devil. Like, oh, Prince of Darkness can't trick a tradesman. Number 8. George Lukens. Back in the day, if you got sick, you kind of had two options. You either got sicker and died, or you could go to a church and get an exorcism. On May 31st, 1788, George Lukens wasn't feeling too hot. He had started having convulsions, and it was reported that he would yell in a voice that didn't sound human. So he went to the doctor, but after trying almost everything, the doctors couldn't cure him of whatever his ailment was. So he had plan B. He went to see Reverend Easterbrook to get his soul washed. The Reverend tried to help George, but it seemed that what was tormenting him was too strong for just him. So he brought in 6 other priests to perform a super exorcism. The 7 of them took their combined power to cleanse George. During the process, he changed through 7 different demonic personalities, one of which claimed to be the devil. After the super exorcism, George was cured. And probably didn't live past 35 because that's how life went back then. Number 7. The Codex Gigas. Would you read a book that might have been written by the devil? I think that one's a hard pass for me. I'll stick to reading the back of cereal boxes. Well, the Codex Gigas is said to have the devil's actual handwriting, and whoever reads it becomes cursed. Why would you read that? I don't know if I believe that the devil's handwriting is in the book, but I wouldn't want to be wrong just for some light reading. The story goes that back in 1523, Ludovico Spoletano wanted to make the best spaghetti ever, so he summoned the devil. Nah, I'm just kidding. He wanted to answer a series of questions he'd been asked. Exam season is very tough. It's documented that the devil possessed him, grabbed a pen, and started writing. Most of the text has never been decoded except for one sentence that says, "I think it smells like updog." Number 6. through the window. This one was written by Redditor Gereka. It's a story his father told him about when his dad was growing up. He said that when his dad and uncle were younger, his uncle was a bit of a rebellious kid. Never listened, would stay up late, draw dicks on everything. His father told him that it was a big problem, that his uncle was constantly challenging authority and would get in fights with his parents all the time. Well, one night, the whole family heard a blood-curdling scream come from his uncle's room. The family rushed in there and his uncle was freaking out. He said there was a man standing outside his window. Their father went to check for someone but couldn't find anything. His uncle describes the man as wearing a long trench coat and having no face except for glowing red eyes. After this, his uncle was as sweet as pie, became a respectful member of society. So was this a devil encounter? Or was this a story a father told his son so he wouldn't act up? That's healthy parenting. Scare him psychologically, but he'll be a good kid. Number 5, Michael Scott.
No, God!
Not the hilarious character from The Office, Michael Scott was a Scottish mathematician born in 1175 and is considered one of the most brilliant men to come out of Scotland. He traveled through Europe and eventually ended up in Italy. While in Italy, his brilliance didn't go unnoticed. He gained the attention of Emperor Frederick II. Frederick brought Michael into his court as the head astrologer. But when you're a super smart guy back then, people get a little suspicious. It's said he could summon demons to do his bidding, and they would go all over the world to bring him delicacies. And that's just where his power started. There's myths of him defeating a coven of witches that he turned into stone. It's even said he changed the course of the river Steeds. But the most famous one is him summoning the devil to build a road to his castle. His father had just built a shiny new castle and it needed a road. I mean, you don't want to be the only castle in the neighborhood without a road. Like, what do people think? So he called the devil and many demons to build a road for him. He could have just hired contractors. He owed the devil his soul and foresaw that the devil would kill him by dropping a rock on his head. So he always wore a metal cap.
Clever girl.
But one day, he took off his metal cap when entering a church, and a rock fell on his head and killed him. They get you when you least expect. Number 4, John Dee. John Dee was born in 1527 on July 13th. He was an Elizabethan mathematician and astrologer, but he also liked to dabble in the occult. He was into some pretty freaky stuff. Even though he was researching black magic behind closed doors, he managed to work his way up as a man of intellect, becoming the royal astrologer for Queen Mary. However, his little secrets caught up with him and he was arrested for heresy in 1555. How do you get caught for something back then? The only way you would find out would be if you told people. Like, how was your weekend? Pretty good, you know, sacrificed a goat to the Dark Lord. Anyways, when he got out, he kept digging into the occult. In 1582, he claimed to contact the spirit world. People weren't a fan of this, so he had to move up north to the Manchester Collegiate Church. You can go visit his office to this day. There's the desk that he worked at with a giant burn mark in it. It's said that it's the devil's footprint. I would be pissed. I work all this time to summon the devil. He shows up and he puts his feet on my furniture. Number 3, Robert Johnson. Become one of the greatest musicians who ever lived and people are going to start rumors about you. Robert Johnson is one of the most talented and influential blues musicians who has ever walked the earth. And a big myth about him is that he sold his soul to the devil to become as great as he did. As the story goes, he was walking down a highway and came across a man that offered him the ability to play the blues like no one has ever done before, but it would cost him his soul. Robert was like, yeah, I'll do that. I mean, what is a soul really? It's like a concept or like whatever. Well, Robert went down in history for his amazing skills and died suspiciously at 27. Number 2, Niccolo Paganini. Said to be the greatest violinist who ever lived. Seemed to be a common theme that back in the day, if you were great at something, they probably thought you sold your soul to the devil. No, it can be that you have like a natural gift and you work super hard, you just made a deal. Well, the same speculation goes for Niccolo. He was an Italian violinist like none other. He was so gifted that he would surpass anyone who ever taught him. He was touring at 15 and probably got hit on a lot. Part of why people probably thought that he had sold his soul to the devil was that he looked so ghoulish. He was tall, skinny, had pale skin, long black hair. He was kind of like a hot Edward Scissorhands. People would even say that they could see the devil hold his violin while he played. I think they were just jealous. Number 1, George Whitefield. Now this one is my favorite for sure. George was a traveling evangelist. He wandered around trying to get people hyped on God. I mean, we've all seen these guys.
Do it, Jesus! A brand new hit. Bam, 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 bam.
In 1740, George was in Ipswich, Massachusetts. He was putting on a banger show. Like, people were going nuts. Apparently, the sermon was so hot and he was bashing the devil so hard that the devil showed up and was like, "You talking?" And George was like, "Yeah, I'm talking." and then he fought the devil. This is like an episode of Maury. George then summoned the holy power to push the devil out, and after that, the devil fell off a cliff and landed on one foot. He's got like a +10 on acrobatics. It's said that the devil's footprint is there to this day. The devil is probably at home like, dude, I don't even know you. Why are you talking so much smack?